welcome everyone to episode 9 of the Average Ontario Anglers podcast. Today we have a really cool podcast about spring pike fishing. Now, a few episodes ago we had our early ice out pike fishing episode. This one is more of a generalized pike fishing episode, and we're really going to focus on our favorite lures to catch pike and some of the equipment that we use to do it. Now, if you've never listened to the Average Ontario Anglers podcast, if this is your first one, here's what you can expect. Playful banter between two average anglers.
That's right.
Yep. We have Andrew here, who's going to have our interesting fishing fact coming up soon. And we really strive to be relatable and talk about subjects that everyone thinks about and wants to improve on. So if you're looking to improve your fishing game and have a few chuckles in the meantime, definitely stay tuned. And also this week, we'd like to thank our episode sponsor of Blackfly Lures. Isn't that cool, Andrew?
Man, that guy is awesome.
He is.
He's so tall.
He's a giant. We've met him a few times. We've been using his lures for a long time. And I know a lot of people in Ontario have Blackfly lure spinner baits or bucktails in their box.
I'm surprised when I drive, and in small towns, I like to visit the local tackle shop. And I'm always surprised, and like, good for him, how many times I see a Blackfly Lures little display in that tackle shop. My first muskie was on a Blackfly spinnerbait.
Yep. In fact, it was on one of these.
Yep.
And this particular spinnerbait is actually one of our favorites, and it's the Blackfly Lures Big Bastard. Now, the cool thing about this spinnerbait is it's not a big spinnerbait, but it's kind of the in-between zone between a musky spinnerbait and a bass spinnerbait. Yeah. So it's a little bit bigger. It's got a little bit bigger of a hook, bigger skirt, and it is a lure that's great for catching pike, which our episode is about, but it's also great for catching bass. And as Andrew mentioned, he caught of his biggest muskie on this spinnerbait. So we're going to talk more about his lures. He makes fantastic lures. He makes them all by hand right here in Ontario. And Dean was more than happy to sponsor this podcast. So we're going to talk more about that coming up. But first we're going to start with a very exciting and amazing, interesting fishing fact done by the one and only man with a mustache, Andrew. This better be amazing.
Well, I wanted to start off this fishing fact a little something different. So I wanted to talk about the Bible. Specifically, the Freshwater Fisherman's Bible by Vlad Ivanov.
That book it looks as thick as a Bible.
So I found this at a Value Village recently, and I'm a sucker for old, outdated fishing books.
Value Village is great for finding old fishing books.
So this one was written in New York. Copyright is 1964.
Oh,
so
it's up to date.
Relevant. So to keep it with the theme of the episode, I thought I'd talk about the Pike chapter.
Okay.
So I wanted to go into a few different things that he wrote about Pike, and I just look at your reaction to them.
Okay, back in the 60s.
Yeah, this is back in the 60s. So here are some little excerpts from it. He says, "Today there are still a few diehards who consider the pike unworthy of the title of game fish and prefer other species." I think that's still the case.
That's still the case.
A lot of people hate pike.
I fish with a few guys that do bass tournaments, and they're like, they hook a pike, and they're like, yeah, I don't want to even touch that slimy thing.
Yeah. There's another fun one here. In Canada, pike devour hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of ducklings in Saskatchewan and Manitoba.
That sounds like an unverifiable fact.
I like what he says, in Canada, and then also narrows it down after the fact of in Saskatchewan and Manitoba.
Oh, there's lots of big pike there.
One interesting thing he mentions is biologists claim that pike actually improve fishing by keeping down the numbers of yellow perch, sunfish, and other panfish. So in waters where pike are absent, panfish and bass become plentiful but stunted in size. And that makes a lot of sense.
That does make sense.
I think that's actually verifiable.
We fished a few lakes where the bass are stunted, and they're all like literally, you'll catch like a bass that's 2 pounds, but it has the head of like a 4-pounder.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, and the skinny body.
They look so skinny. So
those lakes don't have pike in them. Interesting.
So because this is an old book, and the photos, when there are photos, they're either hand-drawn or they're all black and white. So they describe what a pike looks like.
Okay.
Most pike are olive or greenish in color with an occasional bluish cast. The color becomes lighter toward the belly, which is yellowish or white. This is my favorite little point. There are many yellow-white bean-shaped spots along the sides of the body. Like, ah, yes, pike and their bean spots. Couple of things here. So he talks a few times and just says, for small pike, you can use your regular bass or walleye fishing tackle, such as a light or medium bait casting rod. Or small pike are often taken during the summer months, but the larger pike bite best in the fall after Labor Day, which is very specific. So if you want to catch large pike, apparently only go fishing after Labor Day.
Yeah, makes sense.
So I was wondering, like, what's a small pike? So he later mentions here, on light tackle, pike will put up a good fight, with the smaller ones up to 10 or 12 pounds. That's a pretty good pike if it's in the double digits of weight.
Yeah.
I wouldn't consider that really like a small pike.
That's like a pike that's at least low 30-inch
Yes.
pike. That's a small one.
That's when it's starting to get good. So yeah. But, on light tackle, you can catch, you target 10 to 12 pound pike on light tackle, apparently.
Well, back then, all the rods were made of fiberglass.
That's true.
So it's like an ugly stick. You could literally probably catch, a 40-inch pike on literally an ultralight fiberglass rod.
Yeah. So there's a couple. There's this one here I thought was funny because it kind of contradicts himself in the exact same paragraph. Like big muskies, big pike are often solitary and take up locations which they hold against smaller fish. And later on, 2 sentences later, even big pike tend to congregate in large numbers. It's like, which one is it? Vlad.
He's rolling in his grave right now.
There's a couple other tips for catching pike.
Okay.
A pike usually smashes a lure hard and often hooks itself, but it's a good idea to set the hook with a rod to make sure.
Just in case.
Just in case.
I recommend that tip as well for any species.
Here's something when you're playing the fish. Pike should be played until they give up completely and turn over on their sides before an attempt is made to land them. A large wide-mouthed net can be used for the smaller fish, again 10 to 12 pounds. The larger fish can be gaffed through the lower lip. Perfect for the catch and release angler. A large gaff. So, I don't know if you have either... Oh, sorry. Just before I go into the last bit, because I have a photo to show you. So he also says, it's also a good idea to have a billy or club handy, so you can bop the pike on the head to stun him and stop him from thrashing around. Then you can unhook it with a long pair of needle-nose pliers.
I knew that was popular back in the day to do that for pike and muskie. Because they'd actually smack them on the head with like a club.
And then unhook them.
Yeah.
So the last thing here on handling fish. So he says experienced anglers and guides sometimes grab the pike in the gills, which you can still do, but you have to do it carefully. Especially if you're unexperienced, you'll get your hands sliced up real fast, or you can injure the fish itself.
Is this the eyeball thing?
Or by placing a thumb and forefinger into the eye sockets, which has a beautiful photo right there of, if anyone can see that, apparently that's how you handle a pike.
Yeah. I've seen mostly in older photos and stuff of people picking up pike like that and other fish, and that's super barbaric, even if you're going to keep the fish.
Yeah. And the last thing he's sure to mention at the end is that he talks about how they make good eating, but he does say that pike are somewhat bony.
Somewhat.
Somewhat.
They have a few bones in there.
So yeah, so
not much has changed, I guess, since 1964.
No. So yeah, so that's some little points. There's some good tips in here as well, talking about where the pike will. I don't want to rip on Vlad in all bad ways, but yeah, he's talks about having a good wire leader. Talks about all these surface plugs and underwater plugs, which today we know them as lures.
Yep.
But he has some interesting information on there. But it's interesting to see how much the information gets outdated quite quickly in just a couple decades.
Yeah, for sure. And
so,
we have a lot of older books and magazines that we picked up at
Yep.
Value Village or at Rummage Sales and stuff. And it's funny, like some of the, especially I find the advertisements the funniest.
yes.
But,
And even stuff like this, like again, this is from the 60s, but it's like, oh, that's top of the line spinning equipment right there.
yeah.
That's a picture of the South Bend Supmatic. Does that even exist anymore? Oh, look, casting reels.
Yeah, the equipment has definitely gone leaps and bounds. Not in quality, but in performance for sure.
Yeah.
'Cause back then, those reels, if you probably found one, it would probably still work.
I actually have an Ocean City reel just like this one. But so yeah, that's
That's
my
interesting.
interesting fishing fact.
I like that because it's something different, and it's funny. Again, like you said, it's funny how things have changed so much. Like you would never pick up a pike through the eyeballs now, and if you did, I have seen someone post a picture, and it's probably just due to ignorance. They didn't know. They were told that's how you pick it up.
Yeah.
They're not an avid fisherman, and they get roasted in the comments.
Yeah.
like roasted. But yeah, definitely don't pick up a pike like that. But anyway, that was cool. I'll give you a. What do I rate you as a number rating?
Sometimes.
Okay,
Go for it.
So I'll give you a number rating of 91%.
Ooh.
So I like that one. That was good.
Nice.
I like old
The,
stuff.
the great thing is this can be a series because it covers a multitude of topics. There's a bunch and over 120 photos and drawings.
Nice.
But it goes over, apparently it's a Bible worth of information about various species of fish.
Interesting. So this one was for April. Why don't you do another one in May? And
Sounds
for
good.
May, why don't we do muskie? Is
There's
muskie in there?
yeah.
Sweet.
There's also pickerel, which is not walleye.
It's a chain pickerel.
Chain pickerel, and there's 2 other types of pickerel as well. But I didn't read too much into that, so that'll be a surprise for everyone.
That was awesome. So again, we would like to plug our podcast sponsor once again. We got Blackfly Lures. And again, we have been using his product for a while. So the giveaway this week is going to be a $25 gift card for Blackfly Lures website, which will get you a few lures to get you started for the spring. We really like their spinner baits for pike, for bass. I mean, we've caught everything on them: bass, pike, muskie for sure. He makes a lot of really big muskie baits too. If you're a hardcore muskie guy or girl, he has some really big musky grub bucktails and big spinner baits.
If you like finesse presentations, he's got some really nice small ones with silicone skirts.
Perfect for crappie and
crappie, even for like smallmouth bass. Like I find, it's a very small presentation, but they'll inhale that thing. Like I like fishing those small spinner baits around heavy cover because they don't go very deep.
Yeah, and one of his most iconic lures is spinnerbaits with the hatchet blades. I don't know if you've ever seen them, but definitely check it out. We'll post some pictures on our Instagram. The hatchet blades, they're just unique, and they throw off. I think the reason that they work so well is they just throw off a slightly different vibration. So maybe if you're fishing pressured water, like in cottage country, where every other guy or girl is throwing a spinnerbait, try a hatchet blade spinnerbait, and that slight difference in vibration makes a huge difference in catching fish. And again, he has all kinds of really cool colors. In fact, this year he actually just released 2 new colors. One is like a purple and black with glitter. It looks really good. And one of them is his banana spinnerbait, which is like a really interesting combination of like yellow and brown.
I got the banana one.
Yeah, so we picked some up. We saw him actually, Dean, at CanCast.
Yep.
And I also saw him at the Spring Fishing and Boating Show. He's a super nice guy. So anyway, we're going to get into our main topic, which is pike fishing and the presentations that we like. If you've never fished for pike on purpose, you've probably caught one before when you're bass fishing, and a lot of lakes in Ontario are riddled with pike, like just so many pike in them, right?
And a lot have moved in because of the Trent Severn Canal.
Yeah, so like the Kawarthas, for instance, a lot of them have pike in them now, and like we've actually had some really good pike fishing in some of the Kawartha lakes where like maybe 20 years ago there was literally no pike at all. Yeah. And now we can go to certain Kawarthas and actually successfully catch pike every time we go.
And those are the areas where pike is open all year round as well.
Yeah.
Because they are invading into those lakes. Again, it's not the pike's fault. They're just following the water that's not connected.
Yep.
But it's great because you can go there, and oftentimes if we're fishing for muskie, for me, I love, like, pike tastes awesome. I love it.
We like eating pike.
I'll keep the pike. If I catch a pike, I'll keep it out of the Kawarthas every single time.
Yeah. And it's not a bad thing that they're in these lakes, but if there is muskie in those lakes, because the fact that pike spawn and their fry hatch before muskies do, the juvenile pike oftentimes feed on the juvenile muskie, which does impact the populations of the native muskie. So
I found out recently that lakes where pike and muskie have always coexisted, muskie will spawn twice. They'll spawn once with pike, which is why you get tiger muskie. And then they'll also spawn a second time later.
Interesting.
So they'll and the same muskie will spawn twice. It's not like 2 rounds of spawning with different fish. The same muskie can spawn twice.
Interesting.
And they'll reserve some of their eggs to spawn at their regular time when they do.
I wonder how that works. So imagine, for instance, that you're a muskie and all the pike are spawning, and you're like, okay, pike and muskie normally don't spawn together. That's not a normal thing.
Yeah.
And then you're a muskie and you're just like, hey, how's it going? Bunch of pike, you know? And the pike are like, hi. But yeah, so like, for instance, I was just out in the Kawarthas this past week. Or the last weekend remember when the temperature was like 30 degrees? It was like insane. It was like late June weather in April. The water was 48 degrees. And I found some shallow water around reeds, and the water temp was actually in the low 50s. So sometimes finding that slightly warmer water temperature in the early spring is the deal to find them. And I actually found a few pike right away. They were actually full out spawning, and they didn't want to have anything to do with me. They weren't physically spawning, but you could tell that they were kind of like getting ready to.
Their attention was on.
Yeah. I actually chucked a fluke out, dropped it literally right on top of this pike's head. I literally landed the thing on its head, and it just sat there. Like they had nothing to do with what I wanted. You know,
it is good too in the spring. For again, we talked about ice out pike before, but one of the things that spring pike will do is they'll load up, and they like to spawn up in the creeks as well.
Yeah.
And so when they're staging in these creeks, they're putting on this big feed, before spawn, where they're eating a bunch of dead fish, where the winter has killed them. And as the ice melts, it's all flowing out, and these dead fish are washing downstream, and that's the pike are feeding on. So oftentimes a dead presentation will outperform live bait or something more active sometimes.
Dead bait, yeah.
Yeah, so,
and you
so
can fish
fishing
it on the bottom or under a bobber.
So even if you're using, if you're fishing a fluke, like Jesse was trying the right thing of casting out with like an unweighted fluke and just letting it sit there, like barely moving it, that, I'm surprised you didn't get at least some interest in that.
I feel like early spring pike fishing can be hot, but there's times when literally they won't touch anything.
Yeah.
Like they're so focused on spawning, not interested. But anyway, we're going to talk more like generally, it's not early spring. So like for me, pike fishing, it's when it opens pretty much everywhere. It's kind of like early to mid-May. And then you have that 1 month period kind of before it gets really hot that a lot of the pike are still shallow, because pike like cold water, bigger ones anyway. So bigger fish than I'd say like 30 inches, they go deep.
Yep.
Yeah, as soon as it gets hot, they go deep.
Or if it's not deep, it's wherever there's colder water can be found. So if there is like a spring-fed creek coming out, or if there's an underwater spring, it may be in shallow water, but the temperature itself is cooler. That's where they're going to be.
Exactly. So if you don't have, maybe you're fishing a Kawartha Lake, for instance, because that's where we fish. A lot of that water is fairly warm. So a lot of the fish will actually slide slightly deeper. And that's why a lot of the old folks tell was that the pike lose their teeth in the summer. Like you can't catch them because they're not there. They're just spread out and they're in deep water.
Yeah.
They're easier to target when they're still shallow. So we're going to kind of talk about some of the presentations and lures that we have had success in catching fish. And I have in front of me on a table, I have a whole bunch of lures. So we're going to try not to I literally just slam my hands down on all these lures.
He just rattled his hands on a bunch of exposed treble hooks. I just had a thought of, and now we're changing this episode from pike to how to remove a treble hook with braid live.
So I think the first bait, if I could only have one pike bait, would be a jerk bait.
I get to talk about it.
Okay, so we're going to talk about jerk baits / minnow baits.
Yes.
Because I'd like to add in some other baits that aren't necessarily
You can fish
jerk
minnow
baits
and still retrieve them erratically.
Yeah.
Jerk bait isn't the only thing that you can start twitching in the water.
So the reason we're going to kind of talk why jerk baits work so well, pike are very visual feeders. And jerk baits are a visual presentation. It's an erratic presentation, and the whole reason why jerk baits work so well for pike, for bass, for muskie, everything, is because it elicits a reaction bite. Yeah. So even if the fish are not actively eating, which oftentimes pike are actively feeding, that erratic darting action where it stops and then it starts, it's like if someone throws a ball at you and says catch, and you just grab it. Like you weren't thinking about grabbing it, you just have that reaction to grab it. Or if something's falling, like say you drop a cup off the counter, you just grab it. That's what a reaction bite is for a fish. So when you chuck that jerk bait out, the pike, since it's flashing and rattling and jerking around, and then it stops and it looks at it, and then all of a sudden you jerk it again and try to take it away from it fast, its predatory reaction is to just grab it.
I've seen so many times where you're fishing a jerk bait and then like you stop it, you let it sit in the water column, especially suspending jerk baits. They're not moving. And then the fish that is, you know, a couple feet away just kind of slowly comes up to it, stares at it, and is not moving. It's not going to take the bait. And like you say, as soon as you move it, instinct takes over of something moved in my strike zone, must hit.
Yeah. And that's why they're so effective. And for pike, oftentimes in early season, like we talked about the, you know, ISO pike, the pike are moving slow because the water's cold. So a jerkbait is it can be, the long pauses help it be an effective bait. But even throughout the summer, they can be great baits because they're so erratic. And some of our favorites we have here, if you're just getting into pike fishing or any kind of fishing, one lure that you should own, and it's very reasonably priced, is a Rapala Husky Jerk. Yep. And the Rapala Husky Jerk, it comes in tons of sizes. My favorite size is the smallest size with 3 trebles. I think it's called the HJ12. There's a one size bigger than this one as well. They both work great for pike. And the one color that you have to get is Fire Tiger.
Yes.
And pike just love it. And I think it's because, again, they're visual feeders. And that bright color, it kind of looks like a perch, but it's super bright. It's got orange belly, chartreuse sides, green on the top with black stripes. It's just super contrasty and bright.
Yep.
And that color works great for pike.
100%.
What's your favorite?
I really like the ripstop and the X-Rap as well, but the ripstop is
Rapala.
Rapala. Yeah.
Yeah.
So again, in Rapala lure, they're more expensive than the Husky Jerk. The benefits of them, they both cast a lot further. The big difference between, like, the X-Rap is an excellent jerk bait. The difference between the ripstop and the X-Rap is the ripstop has an extra fin on the backside that comes down. So when you retrieve it, when you jerk it, like, this thing is super erratic, and then it just stops dead. It doesn't carry much momentum in forward movement after that pulling has stopped.
Yeah.
So it's super, like, quick start stop, and that can, like, I find that drives pike wild too, like any fish too. But I've had good success with the ripstop in the last couple of years as well. Oftentimes in like more of a bait fish color or white, but that's personal preference.
Pike love white.
Yeah.
Like white jerk baits or any kind of spinner bait, they love it.
Yeah.
Another thing about the ripstop is it's flat-sided.
Yes.
So it has like very shiny sides. It's a flat-sided jerk bait. So when you jerk it, it kind of has a slight roll to it as you jerk it, and it just shoots off flash on both sides.
Yeah.
Which makes it a great bait if you're searching for fish.
Yep.
One bait that I know Andrew, I'm going to let him talk about it because he's caught a lot of really good fish on it, is again, we're just talking Rapalas right now. I'm just pulling stuff out of my actual tackle box.
Yeah.
This is a Rapala, the jointed Rapala.
Yeah.
It's
so
a classic.
This is the J13. Generally, you can definitely, I've caught pike on the J13 as well, but I'll usually go down to, I think it's the J10. It's a fairly small one, but I love it because it floats. So when you're fishing pike, especially in if they're in the shallow water, you have this early weed growth coming up, and you've got maybe 2 feet between the surface of the water and the weeds. And if you fish anything, like if you fish a regular jerk bait, you're going to be heading down to those weeds. You're going to be fouling it up instantly. But the floating Rapala is nice because you can start retrieving it. It has this wicked, like, slow wobble through the water. And then if you notice it's getting too close to the weeds, you just stop retrieving, and it just, like, floats up and kind of shimmies up. And they'll hit on the pause too. Yeah. And then it comes to the top, and then I'll just start pulling down again. And you can kind of work it in stages. If it's really shallow, you can pull it in like 2 feet, stop, let it float. Pull it in 2 feet, stop. Or you can just find a good slow retrieve, and it'll just stay down like a foot and a half, just above those weeds.
Yep.
And if a pike sees that above its head coming along, it's not going to pass it up.
And it's also a really good trolling bait, which is another thing we do a lot of for pike, is we'll troll minnow baits or spinners or spoons behind the boat. Yeah. That's the kind of bait you can just chuck it behind the boat. And if you have a canoe or a kayak, you can just paddle along, and that lure is just working down. They dive a bit, but not super deep. But if you find yourself fishing in, say, slightly deeper water, just cast a bit farther behind the boat, and it actually will dive down a decent amount. And we have caught some good fish trolling.
Yeah. And pike can be found, like, in a lot of depths. Again, later in the year, you're going to find the bigger ones are deeper, generally speaking, because it is a cooler temperature. Pike, they almost require to be in a heavy cover area. And what happens is they'll be sitting there, and when they see a target approaching or nearby, they will bend their body into an S shape and then straighten out instantly and shoot forward like a rocket. Mm-hmm. And so they ambush from cover. So that's heavy weeds, that's timber, that's some thick rocks if you're fishing like around a shelf, anything they can blend in with or hide around. That's where the pike are going to be feeding is those areas. So if you're trolling beside structure in a channel that has like a good weed line or something like that, or close to shore in a river, those are areas that we would troll generally. And stuff like the J13 or the jointed rapple of any size is fantastic because you don't have to go very fast. And again, pike are fast, so you can fish them any speed really. You control pretty fast for them too. I personally like a slower approach a lot of the time, but you control the stuff and they will just shoot out of nowhere and just annihilate it.
Yeah, and engulf the whole thing.
Yeah,
it's crazy. All right, we have so many lures we could talk about. We're going to try to keep it fairly brief. Andrew has his hand on one. This is one of my favorites. So let's talk about spinnerbaits first, and then we'll talk about that chatterbait.
Okay.
So spinnerbaits are a fantastic lure for pike. And why is that?
So the flash, the vibration, again, you can fish it around cover. So you're fishing where the pike are.
Yeah, so a lot of the Kawartha lakes that we fish or like other areas that have pike, you're fishing around structure, timber, wood, well, that is timber, weeds, stuff like that. And a normal spinner, if you're using a spinner, you might get snagged. Yeah. Now, if you're a shore fishing person, which a lot of us are, snagging your lure, far away in the water, you're not going to get it back. You're going to lose that lure. So a spinnerbait is weedless and it's a great lure. Now, there's a few reasons a spinnerbait, like Andrew said, has a lot of flash.
Yep.
Now, sometimes flash, especially because like we said, pike are very visual feeders. That's why spinnerbaits and spinners and spoons are so effective. But sometimes when the water is slightly off colored, vibration is more important. So instead of using a spinnerbait, sometimes we pick up what Andrew has.
The chatterbait.
Chatterbait. Not just any chatterbait. It's got to be this one.
So
it doesn't have to be this one, but this is the best one that we've used.
Yeah. So this is the big blade chatterbait.
Yeah. Z-Man.
Yeah. So Z-Man. So they're made really well. Again, it has a larger blade than the general chatterbaits.
Hand-tied skirt, so the skirt won't rip off.
And Jesse has this one tipped to the big grub.
It's a Kalin's 6-inch Mogumbo grub, which is it's not a regular twister tail. It's a big twister tail. Yeah.
I often tip mine with a fluke or something just long and slender. Mm-hmm. I like to have a trailer on it that I let the chatterbait impart action to it. And Jesse often uses a thicker trailer that will have more undulation, like sometimes a swim jig or a swim bait, sometimes like a big grub like this. It can change how much vibration is coming through. Either way, the chatterbait throws a lot of vibration, especially the big blade. And if you've never fished, or if you've only fished regular chatterbaits before, and you cast this thing out and start retrieving it
thumps.
You'll notice a difference.
And the reason, like you said, I don't normally put a big chatterbait trailer on when I'm bass fishing, but that particular lure that you're holding, that's my muddy water chatterbait. It's got a big fluorescent orange blade. It's got a bright white and kind of like there's a bit of orange and chartreuse skirt, and then a big grub. That because the blade's so big, I can retrieve it pretty slow, and it just thumps along. And that twister tail in the back, it's so big, it just is flapping back there, which lets me slow down even more. So if I'm fishing really muddy water and I want to give the fish some time to find it, that's why I put that big grub on, and it works fantastic. And they engulf that thing.
They if you don't have mouth spreaders and a pair of long needle nose pliers, you're not getting it back.
Yeah.
So I really like the big blade as well because Jesse was
literally just dropped it onto his lap. Ooh, that was a close one. Andrew's like, I never wanted kids.
So the one of the reasons why I really like the big blade for pike as opposed to the regular one is not only the reasons we already mentioned, but because of that big blade, you can fish the same weight. So you're still casting just as far. Let's say you're fishing a 1/2 ounce or a 5/8 ounce big blade versus the regular one, but it runs like a couple feet shallower again.
Yeah, it's a very shallow runner.
It's a single hook, and you can rip it through the weeds. So if it's hitting on weeds, just give it a sharp tug, and the blade cuts right through the weeds. You can keep bringing it in. So it's awesome for weed cover. That's probably my main go-to when I'm fishing above weeds or around weeds
And when
is
you
a
rip
chatterbait.
it, when you rip it through weeds, when you make connection with the weeds or contact with the weeds and rip it through, that's a lot of time triggers a fish to bite. Like we said, that reaction bite. They may see the bait, they may not be active. If it goes right through their area and gets stuck on a weed, and then you rip it through fast, sometimes they just lash out and grab it.
And I think too, part of that reaction to it is not just the visual of that happening, but you having a bait that's vibrating regularly through the water, hits a weed, the vibration stops. And when you yank it forward, like in the boat, you can almost hear the vibration of really hard, quick as you tug that. So that thing is, as I said, when you're fishing around weeds, it becomes erratic because you're ripping it through. And that's has to be probably one of my favorite pike baits.
And
it
it catches big bass too. And the other thing that I have to mention about the big blade chatterbait is it does have a big hook on it. I think it's a 6/0 hook, which is quite a bit bigger than a regular chatterbait. So it's a bigger hook. They do come in bigger sizes, like heavier weights. I think that particular one is a
3/4.
A 3/4. They come in bigger sizes than that too. So they are a little bit pricey, but for the money, they're a hand-tied skirt. They do last. They do catch a lot of fish. I highly recommend them.
And when you're targeting pike, primarily, or you should have a leader on. If you're targeting pike,
you're not going to lose it.
So you're not going to lose it like you would if you were, let's say you're targeting bass, you don't want to use a leader, pike will bite you off. But if you're targeting pike, you're using this, you might be spending a bit more than a regular chatterbait, but at the same time, your likelihood of losing it to a pike is going to be less because you're prepared for it.
Yeah. And again, like we said, where to use it, like Andrew said, around weeds, in pressured water. I think everyone's like, oh, pike are dumb, they'll hit anything. Not always the case. Sometimes just throwing something slightly different will get you more fish. So that's one thing I'd recommend. So that's chatterbaits. And again, like you can catch pike on any chatterbait, but that particular one is good. Let's touch on spinners.
Yes.
So now I'm not a huge spinner guy, but we've over the years caught a lot of fish on spinners. And I'm just going to tell you, like, any good spinner is going to catch pike. They're just classic lures. They've been around since the dawn of time, like dawn of man, right? But my personal favorite, I know Andrew's, when we grew up fishing at his cottage, we used to kill with the MEPs. MEPs would be great. And one lure that I've caught a lot of pike on is the Panther Martin size 20, which is their second biggest. They have one bigger than this that's like a musky size one. But this size 20, I'd kind of compare it to like a size 5.
I would say it's close to a size 6.
It's a
size 6 MEPs.
Like a MEPs. It's a big blade, and it because of the way that blades are in Panther Martins, the blade actually goes right through the shaft, so it has a very unique vibration, and they do run deep. And I have a hand-tied black marabou skirt on that I put on. This particular one, I've caught quite a few good pike on, and again, you'll catch small pike, big pike, it doesn't matter. Blue fox, like the one Andrew has in his hand, I've done well in blue fox too. But really any major brand spinner is going to be great. They all just run at different depths, so pick the one that is going to work for you.
And again, the different blades on a spinner will give a different action, different vibration, and even just change how deep it runs. So you have a standard I believe Alabama blade they're called, or just a regular
Indiana.
I think Indiana blade is the standard. What everyone thinks of primarily when you think of a spinner. It's part of the genre of a French spinner, so it has this little clasp here that's on the shank. And then, like Jesse was saying, the Panther Martin, it's a sonic spinner, so it has the shaft just passes directly through this kind of recurved spinner blade. So this one, the sonic ones can often give more of a vibration from the blade itself, and they can run fairly deep because oftentimes they're coupled with a big heavy weight. You have the regular spinner blade here. You can also get, I like the Aglia long, so it's a willow leaf blade. And so that one will run a lot deeper because it also has a heavy body, but the narrower the blade, the deeper it will run. It's closer to the spinner body. So those are things that you'd want to consider when, depending on what area you're fishing and how fast you want to have to retrieve your lure.
100%. And again, spinners are great. It's a great lure for anyone, even if you're just starting to get into fishing, or if you have to take someone that doesn't know how to fish. put a spinner on, put a ball bearing swivel on so it doesn't
Yep.
twist their line, and then just tell them to cast it. Let us
Cast,
think of it and just
or if
retrieve
you're
it.
trolling, have a good ball bearing swivel on a leader. And
We've done good trolling
troll,
spinners.
yeah.
Yeah. And you got to watch for that line twist, obviously, but a good ball bearing swivel.
Yeah.
And then the next category of lure, which goes hand in hand with spinners, is spoons. And if you listened to our last podcast, hopefully you did, we had our podcast that we talked about a lot of spoons, Len Thompson spoons, Williams wobblers, and one of the most classic Pike spoons, we kind of touched about this last episode, is the Len Thompson 5 of diamonds.
Yeah,
that's a classic. Another one would be the Daredevil, the red and white.
Yeah.
Again, I was telling one of my favorite Pike spoons is the Len Thompson Fire Tiger, the platinum series with the silver back, and it's a Fire Tiger painted front, and it does well. The size that I'd recommend for Pike fishing is just the number 2. It's a 3/4 ounce. It's not a big spoon, but it catches big fish.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to use I think a lot of people think you got to use a giant lure to catch pike, but generally speaking, they'll hit most bass size lures, maybe something a little bigger, but you don't have to use giant lures.
Yeah, like a lot of the time, like I said, we often used a number 3 MEPS spinner. Like, it's not very big, but the pike would again, they inhale it, they'll take it, and I've caught pike, well over 30 inches on those. I personally haven't broken the 40 mark, but one of these days I will. But you don't need huge baits. Like, how many times, if you are an avid bass fisherman, how many times have you been casting out like a small frog on the surface, or a small little like swim jig or something like that, and you're casting around, and all of a sudden this sharp tug, set the hook, and it's gone. Guess what? That was a pike.
Or a muskie.
or a muskie. And like, that wasn't a huge offering for them, but they took it. If you're targeting pike, you're fishing those areas, you don't have to be using what you might consider like the pike's ideal size for, they can eat up to a third of their body size. Okay, I'm going to use something a third of the body size of pike I want to catch.
Yeah.
Can you? Yeah. But you're going to not get a lot of fish.
Yeah, and it depends where you're fishing. So, like, again, we live in the GTA, and, like, our area, like in Lake Ontario, there's some giant pike, and there are some 40-inch pike in some of the Kawartha lakes. Every once in a while, people will catch one. But if you live in northern Ontario, there may be areas where there are giant pike. Or if you live in literally, like, Alberta or Saskatchewan, 40, 45-inch pike are fairly regularly caught. So using a bigger bait may help you catch that bigger trophy fish that you're targeting. But here in Ontario, in southern Ontario anyway, generally speaking, you don't have to chuck the huge baits if you're just trying to catch some pike, if you're not targeting trophy pike. Another spoon on the same topic is a classic, and I'm pretty sure almost everyone's grandpa has one of these in his box, is the Johnson Silver Minnow.
I've got a couple from other people's grandparents' tackle boxes.
So the Johnson Silver Minnow, it's been around for, I don't even know, it's decades.
I believe it was the first weedless spoon on the market.
And this particular one I'm holding in my hand is actually a Fire Tiger. I think the one that most people have is just the silver one.
Yeah.
The good thing about this spoon is it's weedless-ish. Like, obviously it depends where you chuck it, but
if you want to be a crazy fool and cast a weedless bait into absolute slop and get complaint,
it's gonna
come on. It's not, weedless is to be taken with a grain of salt. Yeah, subjective. Yeah. That's a good term.
But one reason that I started using these more recently again is because I started fishing with people that generally don't know how to fish, or they haven't fished in a long time, and we're going pike fishing in this certain Kawartha Lake, which is a little bit shallow. It's full of weeds, lots of bass, but also tons of pike. So I'll just tie on like a fluorocarbon leader and a Johnson Silver Minnow, tell them to cast it out, and then just start reeling it in as soon as it hits the water, because it's not very deep. And it just has this really good shimmy. It comes through the weeds pretty good. Like, oftentimes you'll get a strand here and there of weeds, but generally speaking, it comes through, and oftentimes it comes back with a fish on it. So it works good. That's another really good underrated lure. Not underrated, just I don't think a lot of people fish them anymore. Another
weedless spoon that I really like for pike is the Northland Tackle makes it. It's called a Jawbreaker, and we always call it limber legs because it has limber legs, which is a little skirt on it, but it's the Northland Jawbreaker. And one of the big things I like doing with the weedless spoons is fishing them around timber. So if I'm fishing shoreline, again, like, it's great for someone who's inexperienced. A lot of time when I fish shoreline, I fish weedless lures, because if I do a bad skip or I just cast real bad
You get
and
it back.
goes in the tree, I can just slowly reel it in and I can generally get it back 9 times out of 10. So if you're fishing around, you know, some sunken timber and whatnot, it's like old stumps and stuff, which again, pike will love that. And oftentimes that timber will warm up quicker in the year. So if you're fishing, you know, this time of year in the spring, or if you're fishing early morning or something like that, keep in mind that those areas where the bait fish are and whatnot will heat up sooner with timber around, because the wood will retain a lot of heat because it's so dark. So when you're fishing that with these weedless spoons, you don't have to worry about an exposed treble like you would with your normal spoon, because that's going to hit a piece of wood and now 100% you're snagged.
Yeah.
A spinnerbait you can get through 100%. Chatterbait you can get through most of the time. You know, you can get through maybe some square lip crankbaits if you know what you're doing. But a weedless spoon is like the easiest thing to get through there without any issues. You could like stop it, let it sink between a branch, still reel it in.
And then it flutters down. They're
Yep.
very versatile. Another bait, we're going to we talked a little bit about spinner baits, but I just wanted to kind of plug our sponsor to, again, Blackfly Lures. I know Andrew mentioned this on a podcast before. What is one of the main reasons for pike fishing, especially in musky fishing, that Blackfly Lure spinner baits have like this amazing feature that a lot of other spinner baits doesn't? Right at the top there.
So having a closed eye. So where it attaches on the frame of the spinnerbait, a lot of the times you'll see where it'll come up from the head of the spinnerbait, come up, just make a little U shape, and then head
R-bend.
across.
Yeah.
And head across to the spinner, to the blades. And I'll fish so many times, and especially with a leader, because you're not tying it directly to the frame. You're using a snap swivel or a snap of
Or a wire
attachment.
leader of some kind.
Wire leader, and it'll just slide right up to the spinner bait, to the spinner blades, and you're trying to get it started, you're yanking on it, and you're pulling it in like the first 15 feet of the strike zone, and the thing's not even working right.
Yeah, it's all fouled up.
What I really like about Blackfly is every single one of his spinners that I've seen, they all have the closed eye. So when you have a snap on this, it's always going to be directly pulling from the center of that frame where it should be. So it doesn't, these don't foul up like other spinnerbaits do when I'm casting them.
And
So
if you're like
I love
me
that about them.
and you like to switch lures a lot, it's great because you can use a snap and you can just quickly, snap one lure on, take it off, put another one on, and it's great. So that is one feature. I know a lot of, obviously if you buy any musky or pike branded spinnerbait, they're going to be like that. But if you're looking to use any spinnerbait for bass, walleye, pike, anything like that, and you want to buy just like a regular spinnerbait from the store, like what some of the big brands, you can't just use a snap swivel with them.
Yeah.
So you may have to make modifications to be able to use it. These ones are ready to go right out of the package, and they catch fish. And proven colors for Ontario, which is another reason I love buying stuff from Ontario companies. Because, like, for instance, I talked to this guy, Dean, and I was buying some musky spinnerbaits, like the big ones he makes. They're called the Pike and Muskie Takers. And I said to him, like, yeah, I want, a few of these. This was maybe 2 years ago. And he's like, where are you fishing? I was like, oh, I fished the Kawarthas. And he's like, oh, I got this color for you. And it was like this purple color, silicone or rubber skirt with silver and white mixed in. And it's not a color I would buy personally. I didn't think much of it. I was like, okay. So I took his word for it and I bought it. And I used it and I was trolling with it one spring and I caught one of the biggest pike ever out of the Kawarthas. Big giant pike. And I was like, yes, he was right. He was right. So if you want to, get actual, like, cause you have to think he's selling lures all over the place and people are telling him like, hey, I caught tons of fish on this color or this color, and he's coming out with new colors and he knows what colors work in different areas. A lot of these bait makers do, right? So talk to your guys at your tackle shop or talk to people that make the baits and they will get you on some really good colors. Like we were talking about that about Mike from Waterwolf Lures a few weeks ago. And I said to him, like, I don't know what color to pick. Like I have ideas, like obviously I've been fishing a long time. I could probably come up with pick one of the colors that would work, but why don't you tell me what one do you think is going to work the best? And he was like, this color, 100%.
Yeah.
And I went back and he's like, a second choice, this one. And I bought that one too. These guys know what they're doing. These, people that make baits, that's what they do.
And that's a good point too, because a lot of the bait manufacturers are staged from the States. Like the fishing industry down there can support a lot more business overall just because of the numbers. And so you think of like what would be the main forage fish or bait fish that most of the lures or a lot of the lures out there imitate?
Shad.
Shad.
which we don't have.
Do we
here.
have shad here?
Well, not we do in
Not
some lakes in
not
Ontario,
numbers.
but not in like say like the Kawarthas. There's no shad.
So they're not going to be like a main food source that you're trying to match. So a lot of the colors where it's like, oh, like sexy shad, stuff like that, can they work? Absolutely. They might work just because it's, you know, close to a white spinnerbait or a white bait. It's a killer color. But to find like that niche where that's something that the local fish just go nuts over, that's something that these local guys, they know. They've been making these baits and trying them for a long time, and like Jesse said, they'll hear from their customers as to what works and what doesn't.
Yeah,
too.
and they see what sells.
Yep.
Oftentimes, I used to work at a tackle shop, and you'd always know what colors work the best because those are the ones that aren't on the shelf. If you ever go to a tackle shop and you're trying to pick a lure, if there's only one of something left, buy that one. That's the good color, and I'll tell you. Like for instance, like Jim's jigs.
Yep.
So like. Big Jim ties a fantastic, you know, walleye bucktails. And every year when he stocks up at Gagnons, we go and we're going to buy some hair jigs because, you know, they work great for, you know, for walleye and a lot of other fish. And I'm always like, there's so many colors. You're looking at the wall and there's like 50,000 colors. And you're like, which one should I get? And you look at the ones that the least amount on each peg. You're like, okay, the black and, you know, green, that's a good one. There's only two left. Grab both of them, you know? So that's one way that
Fire
I do it.
Tiger and black.
Yeah. So anyway,
I actually talked to Big Jim. He's at Gagnons the one time, and I talked to him like, hey, like, I'm gonna get a couple of your jigs. What color should I get? He's like, fishing Kawarthas. I'm like, yeah, I want to go for walleye. What do I use to catch walleye? He just looks at me like, perch, black. I was like,
yeah,
okay, that's exactly what I have in my tackle box now.
And again, they know what sells.
Yeah,
they know what people constantly buy.
He's tying them. He knows which material he's running out of first.
Yeah. All right, so we're gonna move on to we have 3 categories left. So we kind of talked about, like, you know, you don't have to use big baits, but
you can.
If you would like to use a big bait, I'm going to tell you about this bait because I caught one of my biggest pike ever on it. Now, to plug this guy again, Mike at Waterwolf Lures. This lure that I'm holding in my hand is the Shadzilla Jr.
And it's also tore up good.
It is. You look at how many teeth marks this thing has on it.
It's there's more super glue than actual rubber up here at this point.
I've glued this here. This particular one it's a paddle tail swim bait. It's got a treble hook on the bottom and a single hook coming up through the top. It is hollow. And this particular color was recommended to me by a guy that I follow on Instagram who is a musky guy. It's called Tennessee Shad. It's like a creamy white color with a olive back with gold sparkles and then an orange tail and belly. And it looks fantastic. These have a great wobble. Now, if you're thinking of big swim baits and you're like, oh, the Megabass Mag Draft, I'll tell you this is better for pike for so many reasons. This can actually be retrieved way faster. A Mag Draft, for instance, or that kind of style of bait, you have to retrieve it at such a specific speed or else it turns on its side and doesn't work. The Shadzilla Juniors... they fish deep and you can reel them fast, and the body, the thump that this big paddle tail gives off, it attracts the pike. And I've caught pretty big pike, not giant pike. Like, again, we're only average guys, but I've even caught I've caught pike that are like 20 inches on this too. Yeah. And what they always do, and I find, is they headshot this thing. They come up and they grab it, and they're always hooked just on the big treble on the bottom. For me, they're not even hooked on the top. They're not overly expensive. They come in a 2-pack. And if you're looking to get them, obviously you can check out Waterwolf Lures website. But one of the local stores that carries them is East Hill Outdoors. Yep. And we've picked up a few colors there. And that is a fantastic bait for pike. I've also had big bass fall these, not commit. And they're very, very popular for musky fishing. They come in several sizes, but the junior size is good. And it's about, I don't know exactly off the top of my head, but I wouldn't say it's more than 2.5 ounces. Yeah, it's in that range. So, and
because it comes in a 2-pack, which is cool, what Jess and I have done as well, we'll go and we'll just split a pack and we each get one. So if you want to try a couple different colors, bring a friend and
and like, get 2 colors. I think you get 2 of them and it's like $30. So it's like they're $15 each, which for a big swim bait like this is not that expensive at all. And they're great for musky, like I said too. You can fish them so many different ways. They just catch fish. And again, this one has teeth marks all over it. And what you do is pike obviously rip these up with their big teeth. You just super glue them together or get some of that mend it stuff. And they will last. This one's, I've caught probably 6 or 7 decent sized pike on it, and it's still got a lot of life in it. Yeah. Another swim bait. So that's more of a bigger bait. Again, you can chuck way bigger baits than that. But we're just talking about, Ontario. And the average, the average guy or girl that's fishing is not going to have a specialty bait rod. Now, to be fair, that Shadzilla Junior, you can't chuck that on a regular bass rod.
Yeah.
You
need something heavier.
It's a lure that's pushing 3 ounces, which even a heavy power bass rod, it's more than double what it's rated for. So what I use is either a medium heavy musky rod or a swim bait rod.
Yep.
Why don't you talk about these, Andrew?
So these are the 360 swim baits. So they come in a various sizes. This one actually has rattles inside of it on the head, and they're married perfectly to the 360 rubber bodies that you can get. So these jig heads are designed for it. So again, you can get a couple different sizes. So Jesse's got a couple here. This one is the 1/4 ounce, and it has a chartreuse body, chartreuse head. So you can marry it directly, like color wise too. They blend together really nice.
Yeah.
This one is like a baby bass. It's like a green with some fleck. I guess green pumpkin with a white and black speckled belly. And this is the 1/2 ounce. So it's about 6 inches long.
Yeah.
They got really nice hooks. The big ones especially, like that's a predator.
It's
that's
a
beast
hook. It's a stout hook.
Yeah. But even the smaller ones, they got a pretty good hook size and strength for it. So when you catch pike on this, again, they normally annihilate this thing, and you can fish them at a variety of speeds. You can jig it still. You can still vertical jig it if you want.
They're super versatile.
And when you're fishing this, it's a lot more. I find it more of a subtle presentation for it, because again, there's not a whole. It does have, like I said, rattles. Its tail is kicking, but
there's no flash.
There's no flash on it. But sometimes, like, that's what you want, like in clear water and you're fishing.
Slick, calm.
Yeah.
Sometimes
stuff like this
a lot of flash isn't what you want.
Awesome. And I remember we were fishing for spring pike, and Jesse was fishing this one exactly, actually.
That was actually in the fall, remember?
Sorry, that was a fall.
It was in October. We were fishing for pike.
Yeah, so he's casting this thing around, and I'm fishing my classic X-Wrap.
And this is a 5.5 inch big swim bait.
And we were targeting pike. We caught a few that day. It was a pretty decent day.
Yep.
And this thing was just hanging off the side of the boat. we're in the canoe.
Yep.
And we're eating like a sandwich or some Timbits or something. And all of a sudden I look over, I'm like, Jesse, look. And there's this like pocket in the weeds that this is just, he's not holding the rod, it's laying across his lap with this just hanging off of like 8 inches of line in the water.
Yeah.
And this is like 3.5 pound bass, like largemouth.
Yeah.
It just like comes up there, just staring at it, and just like opens his mouth and just grabs it. Just holding it in his mouth, not moving.
It didn't move.
And Jesse just like lifts his rod, sets the hook.
Yeah.
And just like instantly lands this bass.
Yeah.
But like that shows the characteristics of these, even not moving, had enough draw, because again, you don't have to have like a crazy presentation for this stuff. Yeah. Sometimes subtlety will work.
And we're not necessarily saying the Storm 360 GT swim baits. Those are just the ones that we like because they're good quality. The plastic is very durable. It's like a more of a thicker durable.
The plastic doesn't slide off either, I find, on these. Like it's not sliding back and you got to reset it all the time. Like it seats very well against the head because they're designed for it.
And they're widely available. Like you can get them anywhere. Canadian Tire, huge selection at Gagnon Sports when we were there. And again, they come in 3.5, 4.5, and 5.5. And the best overall size I'd say is the 4.5, which is that one there. It catches anything: walleye, bass, pike, anything will hit that. And then the bigger size is more for pike, muskie, big bass, big walleye, that kind of thing.
Something I'll often do as well is I can't remember the name of the jig heads now, but I've found some weedless swim jig heads, and I'll tip that with just a small swim bait trailer, and that too you can reel right through the weeds, like thick stuff.
Actually, that's the next lure.
So all right,
so swim baits are great. Any kind of swim bait that you buy, just you can either put it on a regular jig head or a weedless head is fantastic. But Andrew's going to talk about, I cut him off because that's our next lure, is the swim jig.
So the swim jig, picture everything we just talked about before of a spinner bait. Has flash, it has spinners. The chatterbait has vibration. Guess what? Those are jigs with longer shanks and extra blades. Yeah. So the swim jig,
it swims.
it swims. The swim jigs are awesome. They're often with a weed guard, which again is built in. It's fantastic. And Jesse has a craw trailer on this one, but Jesse absolutely annihilated me. We were fishing, and I'm casting my spinner bait. I'm casting my X-Wrap. I'm casting all these fairly like aggressive lures, and Jesse's just demolishing me. And I look over and he just keeps casting this swim bait with no rattles, nothing, just a white swim jig, cast it out, reel in, cast it out, reel in, and just like nailing pike after pike. And after that day, I went and I bought my first swim jig.
Yeah, I think it's a bait that's for pike extremely underrated.
Yeah,
and that particular one, to plug a local guy, that's the perfect jig. 1/2 ounce white swim jig. It's got a good hook on it. The weed guard it's fairly light. It's not overly. And then I have a Z-Man Helicross, which is a craw bait, which normally when I fish swim jigs, I like to use paddle tails, but for pike, I like that double craw. It's more like a double twister almost, but once you super glue a Helicross on, it's on there for the season.
Yeah.
And with pike, because of their teeth, I've gotten days and days and days out of the same bait.
Yeah, that's the beauty thing too with Elastec, or Elastec style baits at least, but with Z-Man especially, they have, because of that stretchiness on the bait, like it's nuts. Like those craws, you think of like a pike or anything, like grabs onto one of those, and how many times like you'll have like a sunfish, like, oh well, that's gone. Like this is, it's perfect.
It lasts a long time.
So when pike slice into a bait with their teeth, it's going to get cut. That's a weak point. So anything else, automatically the next pull, you start playing with the water, even sometimes it'll just start tearing more and more, and then it's gone.
Yeah.
Z-Man can be like ripped to shreds, but it's still not tearing off. So that's the beauty of it, is of having that, is you're not going through, bags and bags of your trailers if you're using something like Z-Man. And again, oftentimes you're fishing a faster presentation where scent, in my opinion, doesn't have that much to do with the strike. It's that sight, it's that vibration, it's that presentation, rather than just, oh, I'm smelling something good. I don't really have the time to investigate something and see, oh, is this smelling right, or does it smell weird, or does it smell good? So if you're worried about, oh, Z-Man doesn't have scent, it's not about the scent of this stuff.
No. Any bait that you cast and retrieve, the fish isn't grabbing it and tasting it before you set the hook. You literally, they just grab it and you set the hook. So a swim jig, another reason, like Andrew pointed out earlier, a swim jig is so effective because you can cast that thing through anything.
Yeah.
Lily pads for bass, weeds, rocks, timber. Doesn't matter. You cast it and retrieve it.
It's really good around weeds that break the surface. So stuff like bulrushes, rice, stuff like that, where the pike, they'll come into those areas because they shelter a lot, and that's a great spot. You'll often find them spawning, but they'll hold there. Especially because they're often found around river mouths or springs, freshwater springs, so kind of colder water in the shallows still. And yeah, the swim jigs are amazing because, again, they're weedless, you're not getting snagged, and you can retrieve it right through those longer weeds too.
Yeah, and days to put on a swim jig: slick, calm, bright skies. If it's clear and bluebird skies, even pike, as dumb as they are, they get a little bit finicky. A natural presentation will usually outproduce something. And again, like Andrew said, a swim jig is basically, a spinner bait without a blade, or a chatterbait without the chatter part. Like, it's the same bait, it's just slightly different. It's a tool. You shouldn't be attached to certain lures and say, oh, this one works all the time. Use the best tool for the job. Yeah. If it's windy and the water's churning, put on a spinner bait. Get that flash out there. If it's slick, calm, put on a swim jig. It's more finesse. It works. And also, not pike related, swim jigs smash bass, like amazing. If you don't own a swim jig, definitely pick one up. We're going to talk about quickly some of the swim jigs. Perfect Jig, like we mentioned. We also met this guy, I forget his name. I don't want to guess his name, but Jacked Up Jigs.
Yeah, I don't remember his name either, but yeah,
dude,
cool guy.
We met him, super cool, and he has very nice looking swim jigs. We actually picked up a bunch.
Yep.
Because I like trying new jigs. Also, Weapons of Bass Destruction. I've had really good success on his swim jigs. All these guys make them in Ontario, so definitely check them out. We're going to talk about one bait quickly and a few honorable mentions.
All right.
So for crankbaits, you may not think, oh, crankbaits, like they catch anything. Bass, walleye, pike, muskie, doesn't matter. One of my sleeper lures for pike is a lipless crankbait. Specifically, I know Andrew is a big fan of the Rattlin' Wrap.
Yeah.
For me, it's a Cotton Cordell Super Spot. And the reason is they cost $5. It's just a silver lipless crankbait with 2 treble hooks. And that thing is noisy. Like, you can hear that 50 feet away in the water. And for whatever reason, like, look at that one. Look how...
Oh, it's got hook rash. It's got teeth marks all over it. It's yeah,
and that's just one of them. That's the only one I could find that had hooks on it. But you rip that through weeds or along a deep weed line, pike just inhale it. The only problem I find with them is
so
the
much
pike
noise in
eat
my
it.
hand. I gotta put it down.
Yeah, let me see that. It's like a maraca though. Like imagine this in the water. Like it's a loud bait and it catches. And here's the thing, another sleeper bait for salmon in the fall at the harbor. No one chucks these. Not no one. There's a few people, but they cast. And the cool thing about a lipless crankbait is you can fish it at any depth.
Yep.
You cast this out. Say you're fishing in 3 feet of water. Cast it out. Start retrieving as soon as it hits the water. Say you're fishing in 20 feet of water. Cast it out. Count it down 15 feet. Like they sink about a foot a second. Count them down. Then start retrieving. You can fish them anywhere. They fish fairly weedlessly because as you retrieve them, the hooks are behind the bait.
Yes.
And they catch tons of fish and they're inexpensive. So that's another great bait. Honorable mentions, because we're going to go a little bit over time right now, and they're not even honorable mentions because they weren't at the top of our list. It's just we ran out of time, is a fluke.
Yep.
One of our favorite baits for pike. It should have been one of the first ones we mentioned. If you want to hear more about how we fish a fluke, check out our early season pike video or YouTube, because we talked more about it. But a fluke, a 5 to 6 inch or even a 7-inch fluke on a weightless hook, or even a slightly weighted hook to get it down a little deeper, that'll catch pike. And another one is a swim bait, but a weedless swim bait with a flashy swimmer hook on it. Yeah. It's basically a weedless bait.
Yeah, Texas rigged swim bait.
Yep, with a little tiny piece of wire with a willow leaf blade on the bottom. And that's another bait that you can chuck basically into anything.
An underspin jig. Yep. And
one of my favorite baits to put on that is the X Zone Mega Swammer, which is a 5.5 inch bait, and it's white. So we're gonna now do some of our AOA Q&A. So hopefully you enjoyed that, and if you're on our Instagram or our YouTube, message us below what your favorite pike lure is, or even a few of them, because they're probably some of the same ones we mentioned. So we're gonna start off with our
and if they're not, then I'm gonna find a new favorite pike lure. So
yeah,
for sure do that, people.
AOA Q&A. We have a few questions we're going to go over, then we're going to talk about our giveaway, which is the Blackfly Lures $25 gift card, which is amazing. Bronzeback Master, what's your favorite overall bait company? And I know what you're going to say, so say it.
Hashimoto Concepts. And that's not what he's asking.
I think he means plastic bait. Andrew has a bit of a crush on
plastic bait.
Brent.
Okay, Z-Man. I use Z-Man for pretty much everything because I like buying one package and then having it for 5 years.
Yeah, it's hard to beat Z-Man. Like we try to, support our local bait makers and companies like that. But you get Z-Man, it's made in the USA, it lasts forever and it catches fish. The one time I don't like to use Z-Man is anytime I'm fishing a bait that the fish are going to hold on to, because a lot of their stuff isn't scented like we were talking about. And I'm a firm believer in scent. But I'd have to say, like, major brand wise would be Berkeley for me. Like Berkeley Power Worm. That's what I cut my teeth.
Berkeley would probably be second because when I do want scent, my favorite is Berkeley.
Yeah, and if you're looking to support some smaller local guys, a few of the guys that we saw at CanCast, Pro Water Baits.
Yep. Limestone Lures,
Wham Baits.
Yeah, Wham Baits has some cool stuff.
There's tons of guys and girls that make plastic baits that are amazing. So definitely check them out as well. Here's another question. Average Ontario anglers, are you going to have a meet and greet sometime soon? Maybe a barbecue and fishing stories. No.
I like the idea.
We are actually thinking, and it might not happen this year, but we were thinking of having a fishing meetup get together where everyone fishes out of small tin boats, or kayaks or canoes or anything, and we just kind of meet up and have a fun fishing tournament.
Yeah,
where
like a friendly tournament.
You take pictures of what you catch. There's no actual official weighing, and then we kind of judge it by looking at the picture. So no special equipment is needed or live wells or anything like that. That's in the works. We'll definitely we'll let you know when that comes to light. 613 Bassin, who we also met at CanCast. This will be our last question for this episode.
That's a great one. When are we doing a meet and greet? Next year at CanCast. We'll be there.
Yeah.
Come and meet us and greet us.
613 Bassin, he says, what's your take on pre-season bass fishing? Do you guys think it should be legal in every zone?
I don't know. For me, I like fishing for bass after the spawn. I don't want to disturb them.
But this is
beforehand.
This is before though. This is before. So like right now, you have to think. I had someone message me on my page because the Ontario, the ministry is trying to change the law about taking pictures of bass. So right now they're like, here's the early open season.
Yeah.
It's nowhere when these bass are going to spawn. It's like literally from January 1st, which is under ice, to the first week in May. These bass generally spawn, from like mid-May to mid-June-ish. Yeah. But mid-May to June.
So I've heard so my thoughts have changed on it because I've heard some really good arguments for both sides.
Yeah.
When I first heard about it, I'm like, cool, because I'm not fishing for them on beds, and like I think it's cool to be able to catch fish as much as possible. I want to go fishing, so to have an early season, I think that's great, and I do want to try and make use of it. But at the same time, I have also heard that studies have been shown that when you disturb fish pre-spawn, it will reduce their. They may decide not to spawn afterwards, or it reduces the number of like good offspring that they produce. So for me, it's kind of like it's using my best judgment on the situation.
Yeah.
So I do like the fact that because with the warmer water and stuff recently, they have, I believe, they have early season, but they're also trying to keep bass season closed a little bit longer to be able to let them finish their spawn. So I'd rather have that. I would rather have them keep bass season closed longer to make sure they're done their spawn and pre-fish them, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Because like generally speaking, like say in the Cortez, for instance, because that's where we fish a lot, you're not seeing bass on their beds anywhere near where the season opens.
Yeah.
Generally, like maybe the odd year if it's cold or something, but I don't know all the scientific studies of it. I don't see the difference. So like we've caught bass, like I caught bass last week when I was pike fishing on the Trent River. Yeah. You're fishing a jerkbait for pike and you catch a bass in April. Is that going to affect its spawn 2 months later or 3 months later? Like, I don't know. Like I don't really know. Like bass aren't generally as easy to catch when the water's like 50 degrees. So like, how many people are actually going to target these fish? Is it going to be a huge impact on the fish? Probably not. Yeah. Are bass easy to find when the water's 50 degrees in all these lakes and these different zones? Like they're fishing in zone 20, which is Lake Ontario early bass season. It seems to be fine. In the Kawarthas, like if I told you right now, like, oh, drive up to like Lake Scugog and find a bunch of bass in like early April, it'd be hard. Like the fish aren't just all schooled up and ready to bite. They're hard to catch. So I don't know. My opinion is, it is what it is. Like if it happens, that would be cool. I don't think a lot of people would target them.
I guess my mindset is I want to make sure that I don't hurt anything, but at the same time, I want to go fishing.
Yeah.
So if it's open season and I can, I'll make use of it.
For sure. So anyway, there's lots of good questions, and again, every week we have on our Instagram, we do a poll for our AOA Q&A on our podcast. So you don't have to ask us a question. You can also ask us our opinion on something, because some of you guys and girls know everything, unlike us. But we're just average guys. And
if you're an expert and want to see how dumb we really are,
send us a question.
Send us a question.
We are very opinionated, though, especially me. But anyway, we would like to thank our giveaway sponsor this week. Now, the way it works, because we record 2 episodes at once, so we're not recording every week because we're busy guys.
Yeah.
The first podcast, we do our giveaway live, which was last week when we did Lund Thompson, which we actually recorded about an hour ago. And this week, because the Blackfly Lures giveaway, we couldn't do it live because we didn't have time to, or the way it works on Instagram, we didn't have time to advertise for that. That's going to be a separate week. So this giveaway is going to be only on Instagram, and the giveaway details and all of that information is going to be posted. So definitely make sure you check that out, and we will notify the winner, and we'll do a live showing on our Instagram live or something like that. Mm-hmm. But anyway, we'd like to thank again Blackfly Lures, Dean at Blackfly Lures. Super nice guy. Met him a few times now, and he makes fantastic baits, and he's, again, giving away a $25 gift certificate. So if you do win, make sure maybe buy an extra few spinner baits for us and send us some.
And if you're listening, Dean, just know that Jesse and I, we talked about it already. We're still going to get an order into you ourselves. So
yeah, actually, we have. So again, we were talking about these big bastard spinner baits, and they've done very well for us.
Yes.
I've caught walleye on them. I've caught largemouth on them, smallmouth. muskie, and pike on them. They work for everything, and they're just slightly big enough that they're gonna kind of get you a few extra bigger bites. But I've also caught dinks on these too, and we're gonna order a few more of these because they work great.
Yep.
It's a perfect size. It's just slightly bigger than a bass bait, but it's a lot smaller than a big musky bait. So you don't need special gear for this. You can just chuck that on your regular bass gear and hopefully catch a bigger fish. So anyway, we'd like to thank Dean again. And again, if you're a regular listener of our podcast, we'd like to thank you so much. It's been going fantastic, and like we've gotten a lot of messages and really good reviews on the podcast streaming services and on our YouTube as well. Yep. So we'd like to thank you for that, and we'll catch you on the next podcast, episode 10 next week.
The double digits now.
Woo!